Join the Snoqualmie Valley Museum for Snoqualmie Valley History 101, Colonization Part 2. The second part of the series, Episode 2. Please find the first half of this episode on our YouTube channel. The episode became longer than our editing software could handle. We rejoin in exploring some of settlers who moved to the valley, having left off with Taylor family. Kenneth Branham was married May 11, 1876 to Elizabeth Seitz, and they immediately set out on the overland journey for their honeymoon trip. He was hired to drive a double team of mules and covered wagon for one of a party of a large wagon train which was coming west. He also acted as blacksmith on the journey. As the party proceeded, it from time to time divided until only 3 wagons were left to come through Snoqualmie Pass. They forded the South Fork time after time as they crossed and recrossed. The road was scarcely more than a trail, and it ran diagonally across Mats Peterson's farm, crossing the river at Fairs, on past Borsts to the falls, then along the hillside on the south of the river to Squaw, Renton, thence to Seattle. The party reached the latter city in October. Kenneth Branham remained in Seattle for 3 years, then went to Squaw Valley to manage a farm for Foss and Borst, which he did for 15 months. In the meantime, he staked a claim in Kittitas County, and in October 1880, he decided to move his family there. They came up from Squaw as far as the Fairs place, where they spent the night. Since snow had already fallen in the pass, Lucinda persuaded him that it was not safe to try to take Elizabeth, who was not well, and 2 small children over that winter. Thus, it was due to her, he said, that he became a resident of the valley. They moved into the house on the Mose Morris place next to Lucinda's on the south, intending to go on to his claim in the spring. However, when that time came, they had decided to remain and rented the Morris farm, located on the east side of Northwest 8th, between North Bend Way and Highway 202, from 1881 to 1886. In 1886, he purchased a piece of railroad land, Nintendo property, which he cleared, improved, and cultivated. Since a living could not be obtained from the land alone, Mr. Branham did considerable logging at various times with oxen. He owned a fine 8-head team, which was sometimes used for freighting as well. The Branhams had 7 children: Oscar, Annie, Etta, Myrtle, Nora, Arthur, and Lida. On June 28, 1892, at the birth of their last child, Elizabeth died and was buried on the farm at the foot of Lucinda's Mountain. Rattlesnake Ridge. Elizabeth Seitz Branham was the 3rd female American settler on the prairie. She had a dark complexion with straight black hair. Kenneth Branham was a medium-sized man, with blonde curly hair and a long drooping mustache when young, had blue eyes, and a very fair complexion. Little is known about Mose Morris, also known as Moses Morris. Arriving in the valley by 1870, he had 2 children with his Native American wife before marrying Mary Ellen Reynolds in 1876 and having 2 more children. He was joined by brothers Isaac and Shamgar. He owned property in North Bend, Fall City, and in the Duval, Carnation area. He became the first postmaster of Carnation in 1880 and remained at his farm there for over 30 years before relocating to Seattle shortly before his death in 1914. His wife and 3 of his 4 children predeceased him. Jessie Taylor was born in 1869 in Lynn County, Iowa. She was only 3 years old when she came to the landing with her family in 1872. Jessie married Almus L. Rutherford on September 4, 1888. Almus became a school teacher after attending college. He came to the landing about 1882 and was hired as the last teacher in the first school. Jessie and Almus lived on a farm for many years, located across the Snoqualmie River from town, on the road to Tolt, now known as Neal Road. Almus was very civic-minded and served as King County Commissioner, living in Seattle during that time. During World War I, he was affiliated with the Red Cross and the sale of Liberty bonds. On the way home from a meeting on June 19, 1917, he had a heart attack and died. Jessie moved back to town and lived on the southwest corner of Cedar Avenue and James Street until her passing on April 23, 1955. John Hance Moore was the brother of settler Helen Moore Taylor, who married David Taylor. He married Lydia Chamberlain in 1869. Lydia died the following year. Hance came to the landing in 1872 and claimed about 135 acres in Section 4, at the mouth of Patterson Creek. After Watson Allen built his sawmill near the mouth of Tokel Creek in 1873, Hance went to work there and met Nancy Ann Morris, who had been born in 1860. Nancy had arrived at Tolt in 1875 with her parents, Isaac and Matilda Morris. There, she stayed with the Ross family until August. She then went to work keeping house for Watson Allen at the end of 1875. In the spring of 1876, Hans and Nancy tied the knot before Justice of the Peace Rufus Stearns, the first marriage performed at the landing. Hans died on March 31, 1921, and Nancy died April 25, 1956. David Henry Thomas was born in Ohio. In 1859, David married Harriet Weber. David and Harriet's children were Willard, Elma, and Amanda. She was called Mandy. Willard died in infancy in 1860, and Harriet passed away in 1864. David then married Sophia Evedina Peterson in 1865. David and Sophia had 7 children. Their first 2 sons, Eugene and Francis, died in infancy. Howard was born in 1869. David came to the landing from Iowa in 1872, and staked a 98-acre claim in Section 14, where the present Snoqualmie Falls Golf Course is located. In 1873, the family's household goods were packed and shipped by boat to San Francisco. Sophia, accompanied by her stepchildren, Elma and Mandy, and her own child, Howard, traveled by train to San Francisco, where they waited for their belongings, and then traveled by boat to Seattle. Another son, Francis, was born soon after Sophia and the children joined David on the homestead, but he did not survive infancy. Their daughter, Cora, was born in 1874. David acquired more land from the railroad, and in 1878, he sold his original 98 acres to Jerry Borst and L.B. Wychoff. Gertrude, Gert, was born about 1878, and Ethel was born about 1889. Another child's name, Johnny, appears on the Thomas marker in the Falls City Cemetery, but nothing else is known about him. Elma, Mandy, Howard, Cora, Gert and Ethel all ended school at the landing's first schoolhouse. Sophia died April 3, 1898 at the age of 55. David became ill and could no longer care for his youngest daughter, Ethel. Before his death on March 20, 1900, David arranged for James and Bertha Stryker, who had 2 small daughters, to raise 12-year-old Ethel. David deeded some of his land to the Strykers for accepting Ethel into their family. The Thomas property was divided and sold to several parties before Hans and Inga Nelson purchased 170 acres from David's son, Howard, in 1906 and started the Nelson Dairy Farm. Hattie Amanda, Mandy, Thomas was born in Iowa. She was one of 3 children born to David and Harriet Weber Thomas. When her mother died in 1864, her father remarried, staked a claim at the landing in 1872, and moved the family there in 1873. Mandy met Andrew Jackson, Jack, Bush at a dance held at the Davis-Rutherford place, and they began a courtship. Jack Bush was born in Oregon Territory. When Jack was 9, his family came by covered wagon to Seattle and settled in Squak, now Issaquah. In 1880, Jack purchased land between the Snoqualmie Falls and Rangers Prairie and became acquainted with the folks downriver at the landing. He did some logging along the Snoqualmie River and had floated logs over the Snoqualmie Falls for Kin's sawmill. Jack and Mandy were married on May 15, 1883, and set up housekeeping on a farm on the south side of the Snoqualmie River at the landing. 4 children were born there, Lee, Eva, Elva, and Philip. In 1903, Jack and Mandy purchased land from the Lilienthals in Section 14 on the north side of the Snoqualmie River. With that land acquisition, they became the owners of the first schoolhouse at the landing, where Mandy had attended school as a child. Their first house was a converted hop drying shed that Davis-Rutherford had built in 1888. Several months later, they bought land in Section 15 from Jim and Lorilla Forsman of Squak and moved from the hop shed into the house built by John B. Rutherford when he owned the property. After the deaths of Jack and Mandy, the farm remained in the family under the supervision of Mandy's son, Lee, until 1951, when it was sold to the D.W. Bairds of Redmond, who converted it into a berry farm. Jack Bush died in 1942, and Mandy died in 1947. A Snoqualmie Tribe Perspective.
The Snoqualmie people who stayed in our lands were able to do so because of Lake Sammamish and the kokanee salmon, who provided us with a year-round food source. Lake Sammamish provided us with a home after the 1863 Homestead Act. The agreement was, if we were to leave our longhouses and adopt the colonized way of life, we could legally homestead. In some ways we had to change how we worked with the land in order to support our families. We worked in logging in the lumber mills that filled our lands. We also supported ourselves by picking hops in Issaquah, Orillia, Falls City and North Bend, Snoqualmie. Still, we were able to maintain our traditional ways of life. By the turn of the century, there were 7 Snoqualmie family homesteads along the eastern shore of Lake Sammamish, ranging from the south at Monohan Mill to the north neighborhood of Inglewood. These homesteads were along the creeks that today bear our family names, such as the George Davis and Zacchaeus Creeks. There were many homesteads that held more than one family after several were burned out of their longhouses and had nowhere else to go. While the homes that were built looked like log cabins from the outside, they were traditional longhouses inside with dirt floors, fires in the middle and sleeping platforms around. We kept our traditions alive by practicing our culture. We continued to fish on our rivers, lakes and tributaries for our salmon, and especially our coveted little red fish out of Lake Washington and Lake Sammamish.
McKenna Sweet Dorman, Winter 2018 Snoqualmie Tribe News Magazine. The Snoqualmie Prairie was the largest above the falls, and the Snoqualmie people continually tended the prairie with traditional burning methods to foster plants used for food, fiber, and medicine, such as bracken fern, camas, tiger and chocolate lilies, and native blackberries. The prairie was connected to a Snoqualmie village. By the end of the 1880s, this area had been taken over by hop growers. In 1880, King County had grown by over 225% over the previous 10 years to 6,910. As more American settlers arrived, there was an even stronger push to develop the railroad and expand economic opportunities. In 1882, Borst sold much of his land to the Hop Growers Association. The Snoqualmie Hop Ranch was soon billed as the largest hop ranch in the world. John Muir visited and wrote about hops, Snoqualmie Falls, and our valley in 1889. Hops were not just king in the Snoqualmie Valley, but in much of western Washington. The boom lasted about 15 years until the world market fell, and an aphid infestation damaged the quality. As many as 1,200 hop pickers were needed each year at Snoqualmie Hop Ranch. Native American and European American pickers dominated the industry, but Chinese Americans also were involved regionally. Native Americans came from as far as Haida Gwaii in Alaska and the Fraser River Valley in Canada. Getting the hops to market was challenging. There were still only limited roads and no railroad yet. Even the trip to Seattle was arduous. First, you portaged your goods down the Snoqualmie Falls Hill. If you were lucky, the steamboat got as far as Falls City, with an S on the end. The boat traversed down the Snoqualmie to the Snohomish and on to Everett. The goods were usually transferred to another ship for transport to Seattle. From Seattle, they went around South America and then on to Europe. Prior to the completion of the transcontinental railroads, 1869 and later, the Pacific Northwest, and the Puget Sound in particular, had remained largely unaffected by the industrialization and globalization taking place across the world in the 1700s and 1800s. As railways arrived, they dramatically changed the lives of those around them. The first northern transcontinental to Washington, the Northern Pacific, was completed in 1883. Its western terminus was Tacoma, Washington. Other railroads and connections followed later. The Great Northern Railway, 1893, and the Chicago, Milwaukee, and Puget Sound Railway, 1909, also completed transcontinentals. Transcontinental connections were established by Canadian Pacific, 1885, Canadian Northern, 1915, and Union Pacific, 1898. Frustrated with the lack of connection to the Northern Pacific in Tacoma, Seattle businessmen took connecting to a transcontinental line into their own hands. The Seattle, Lake Shore and Eastern Railway Company, SLS&E, was incorporated on April 25, 1885. Before 1872, the name Falls City did not exist. Previously, the area was informally known as The Landing. From 1872 to 1886, Falls City was the name of the post office in Boham's Trading Post. The Landing became Falls City in 1887 with the filing of the Plat of the Town of Falls City, King County, Washington Territory, by Jeremiah and Kate Borst. With the coming of the railroad, town-sized settlements in the valley were suddenly viable. No longer were village-sized settlements and isolated farmsteads the only option in the upper valley. The 1880s saw the official platting of towns in the valley. July 27, 1887, Falls City was platted by Jeremiah and Kate Borst. In February 1889, North Bend was platted as Snoqualmie Prairie by William Taylor. August 1889, Snoqualmie was platted as Snoqualmie Falls by the Snoqualmie Land Improvement Company. November 11, 1889, Washington became the 42nd state of the United States of America. From 1850, when there were no settlers, to 1887, when there were several hundred settlers in the Snoqualmie Valley, a span of just under 40 years, dramatic changes happened. These would pale in comparison to the following 4 years, when the arrival of the railway would increase valley settlement to over 1,200 settlers, and another 1,000 migratory workers would arrive seasonally. In 1850, when there were no settlers, and 1880, when the Snoqualmie Valley had 109 settlers, a span of just 30 years, dramatic changes occurred. These would pale in comparison to the following decade, when the arrival of the railway would increase valley settlement to over 1,200 settlers, with another 1,000 migratory workers arriving seasonally. County-wide, the settlement population grew from 6,910 in 1880 to 15,894 in 1887 and to 63,089 in 1890. Jeremiah Borst died of typhoid in 1890, at age 59, while on a trip to Green River Hot Springs with his daughter Alice. The loss of this crucial early citizen, county commissioner, postmaster, and businessman must have been particularly difficult for his family and business associates. When his far-reaching, greatly involved, business affairs were settled, Kate Borst received almost nothing. Join us next time for Snoqualmie Valley History 101, the arrival of railways in towns. To learn more information about the Snoqualmie Valley, visit the Snoqualmie Valley Museum in North Bend, Washington at 320 Bendigo Boulevard South, Thursdays through Tuesdays, 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. The museum is closed on Wednesdays and federal holidays. Or learn more at snoqualmievalleymuseum.org.